What's going on, guys? It's Mog back again with another video, and since Square Enix has finally delivered on the first installment of the remake and praise for it is at an all-time high, and I mean, come on, thank God, because I'm tired of Final Fantasy games I'm excited for being disappointments, I figured it would be a great time to really see how the remake holds up to the original. What does it do better? What does it do worse? And so that's what I want to cover with you guys today. This will be a two-part video, the first part covering 5 things the remake does better, the second will obviously cover what the remake does worse. And really quickly, guys, I've got to say that by no means do I think that because one does something better that automatically makes the way the other does it no good. While both games have flaws, there's very little, if anything at all, that I would say either one of them does that is bad. This video is kind of just for fun, and this is all, of course, just my opinion. So if you can think of something different that the remake did better, put them down in the comment section below. If you just liked the game and still didn't think it did anything better, wait for part 2. And with all of that said, without further ado, let's mosey. Other hardcore fans of the original game would probably scoff at what I'm about to say, but I think that one area that the Final Fantasy VII Remake improves upon immensely from the original is the combat.
Wait, what the f? Hold on, what the f did you just say?
Hold on, guys, don't grab the pitchforks yet, hear me out. That's not to say I don't love the original's turn-based battle system, because I definitely do. I grew up playing turn-based RPGs, and I would have been perfectly happy if the remake had just reused the same means of combat from the original game and made it pretty. In fact, I was even an advocate for that, especially after seeing how they handled Final Fantasy XV's combat. But I gotta say, I am so happy that they didn't, because this game is honestly probably better because of it. Square had 2 options when it came to deciding the direction they wanted to take with combat, which were take the original combat system and just reuse it, knowing OG fans would be happy but the game probably wouldn't have as big of a reach, or move Final Fantasy VII over to a real-time combat, which in the end would undoubtedly make it more accessible to a wider audience, but may not appeal to fans who just want a faithful recreation. And so instead, they made a third option and kind of did both. Don't get me wrong, Final Fantasy VII Remake's combat system is for sure 100% real-time. You're able to move around during battle, you can do basic attacks, guard, and dodge in real time, but literally everything else, just like the original, is dependent on you getting your ATB gauge filled. This is where the remake keeps its turn-based roots. If you're playing this game properly, it not only gives you the satisfaction of being able to hack and slash your opponents, but it also requires the same kind of strategy you expect out of a turn-based game, which is all that really matters to me. Turn-based games can be bad, and what I personally really love out of a well-designed turn-based game is 9 times out of 10 how much strategy is implemented in it, and that is something that this game really delivers on in a way that most real-time games don't. The remake really makes you think about every turn you make using ATB just like you would in the original. You want to not only keep each one of your party members with filled gauges, but you also want to make sure that you are effectively using those gauges to suit the battle you're in. Final Fantasy VII Remake is not a hard game. There really wasn't a point throughout my playthrough where I felt like I needed to go grind for levels to be able to defeat a boss, but that isn't to say the game was easy either. There were plenty of times throughout my playthrough where I would get stuck on some bosses, and hell, even a couple of regular fights, and yeah, I'm talking about the sledge worms. But in the end, whenever I was struggling with a battle, it always came down to my decision making and execution. Am I switching characters enough? Am I wasting my ATB and not saving it for a heal? Do I need to make sure this character has this much ATB so I can use this move to stagger my opponent, or use it to do immense damage during a stagger? And whenever I put thought into those kind of things, I would always triumph over even the toughest of enemies, and that is something I really loved because it gave me the same amount of depth and sense of strategy that I have ever gotten from any turn-based game I have ever played before, making me think about every move I make carefully, while also making me to an extent feel like I have more agency in battle by allowing me to also move around and play the game my own way. I do love the original's combat system, but I really believe the remake takes what's so great about it and, in my opinion, makes it far better for a modern day take on Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII has some of the most beloved characters to ever appear in gaming, and if Square Enix was going to remake this game, they knew that this was one area they needed to get right. Fans of the original game have a lot of love for this odd cast of unlikely heroes we get to know throughout the game, and that's mostly because of their backstories and their character development. A lot of Final Fantasy VII was dedicated to extensively fleshing out its characters, and this really helps us to not only better understand their ambitions or why they are the way that they are, or do the things that they do, but also helps us to establish a connection with them. This is another area in which the remake, in my opinion, exceeds at least kind of. I think the biggest issue with comparing this game to the original is the fact that this is not a full game. They needed to save a lot of the backstories and major character development from the original for later installments because we haven't gotten that far in the story and we haven't even gotten all of the characters yet. And so because of all of that, we are missing a lot of the development needed to actually determine whether or not the characters are actually handled better. But looking at just the Midgar section of the original game and then Final Fantasy VII Remake in its entirety, which only covers that Midgar section, not only are all of those amazing character moments you remember still there, and even more grandiose at times, but there are so many new ones and a bunch of little details added about the characters throughout the game that weren't present in the original, especially just while you're moving around the world and the characters are talking to each other. You get to learn things about their personalities and what they think about or how they react to things like Aerith falling and cursing or Barrett being bad at jokes and roast.
So for all I know, a soldier's rank could be the same as his age. Guess that make you a 1-year-old, huh?
And for me, it made a huge difference between how I looked at our main party and even how I looked at what were once just throwaway characters who in this game have now become much bigger in this story. And I think that this part of the remake has fleshed out these characters so excellently in a way that it almost builds more affinity for them than players would have had by the time they left Midgar in the original. And I would even go as far to say that because of how well they've been treated in this part, I predict that over the course of however many games this remake entails, that we can expect to see so much more depth and growth in these characters than in the original. We can probably expect to see a lot more characters get the Johnny and Avalanche treatment, and honestly guys, I couldn't be more excited. I think that world building is another example of the remake taking what the original did great and doing it a little bit better. Now, of course, much like with characters, this is another one that is hard to judge the game on as a whole because of the fact that it's not a full game yet and we did only get to experience Midgar. There are still so many places from the original Final Fantasy VII that we have yet to see, and with the scope that they are aiming for, I really don't even know how they're going to get to all of them if they each get that same treatment. But once again, if we're just looking at Midgar, the remake really does build upon the groundwork laid out by the original in a way that is far grander in scope than I could have even imagined. And it really does give you a greater sense of understanding towards the city, the people in it, and the hardships that they face. Getting to see the economic differences in the sectors we visit, getting to see how different things happening throughout the game really affect the people that live there. It all just combines so smoothly and really pulls you into the world. I know that a lot of people don't like the fact that the remake is in multiple installments, but I truly believe that Midgar is a big reason for that. In the original game, Midgar was the size and scope for what many players would expect out of a setting for a game being made in 1997. Squaresoft had put so much life into the opening hours of the original game, into this massive city, that when playing this game for the first time, players would think that this is it. This is where the full game was taking place, only to be blown away when they realized that there is an entire world full of so many wonderful and unique places waiting to be explored. So the remake really had to drive that same feeling of scope home, and they did. Midgar is absolutely big enough in the remake to be a setting for an entire game, which is why it is. In treating Midgar with that same level of scope in a game of today's standards, Midgar has become far more fleshed out and feels so much more real in the remake. This is another one of those things that by the end of this series of games, this world is going to be far more expansive than it ever was before, and that's most definitely the case for Midgar. Okay, so technically this one could have been mentioned in characters, but I really do think he deserves his own spot in this video, and that's Cloud Strife. Now, I love Cloud in the original game. He is a favorite of mine for sure, but I think a lot of what I love about him comes a little bit later in the game. Sure, Cloud has his moments within Midgar's story that I do have a lot of love for, but at the same time, I was never truly sold on him as a character until much later when we got his backstory and get to see more of his character development. And I'll be honest, I kind of thought that was going to be the case here, but that couldn't be further from the truth. I think that this take on Cloud is my favorite out of anything he has ever appeared in, and we still don't even know that much about him in the remake other than that he was friends with Tifa and an ex-soldier. But I think that what I really like about Cloud in this game as opposed to the original is that throughout this section of the original game, Cloud was kind of just a brooding dick, and yeah, he still kind of tries to put that persona on, but it's so much clearer here that that's all it is, and it's really highlighted throughout different moments points that while Cloud does have a rough demeanor, he really does have a soft side to him and kind of just puts on a front so that more people will respect him. And there are so many instances where that facade begins to slip through the cracks and characters will point it out. And I love stuff like this because it really makes Cloud's growth as a character feel more natural and relationships with these other characters that Cloud reacts with more believable. It was almost impossible to believe that the way Cloud treats Biggs, Wedge, or Jesse in the beginning hours of the original game, that he would have even remotely been upset by their deaths. But in the remake, when Cloud looks sad upon seeing their deaths, or at the very least thinking he did, we actually believe it because we saw that even though Cloud was still kind of trying to be a dick to them, he really did like them, and we saw those bonds getting formed throughout different parts of the game. This remake really emphasizes that Cloud isn't someone who doesn't care about anything. He just tries to pretend he doesn't. Cloud is someone who cares about his friends, he struggles with wanting to do the right thing, and he has his own insecurities. Like I mentioned before, Cloud does have some really good moments during the Midgar section of the original game, and I would say definitely becomes a much better character as the story progresses, but as far as Midgar goes, in my opinion, the remake really did make Cloud a much more likable character with far more dimension right from the get-go. Final Fantasy VII had a story that covered a lot of mature themes, and while the game could definitely get heavy sometimes, that never stopped it from also getting a little weird, and that's not a bad thing. Funnily enough, eco-terrorists blowing up power plants to save the world from an evil mega corporation, cross-dressing, and squats in the gym all go together quite nicely, and the remake not only still has the same amount of weirdness you were hoping for out of the Midgar section, but it gets even weirder. Thirst for Cloud is at an all-time high, the cross-dressing sequence now has an entire rhythm game dance number, and don't even get me started on the massage parlor. I'm hooked. And I feel like I had to mention this one because I know that myself, as well as a lot of other fans, were worried that the game would be missing a lot of these moments that appeared in the original, namely Cloud's cross-dressing sequence being the one that everyone was vocally worried about, and not only did they decide to keep that stuff, but they expanded on them, they made them better, and they added more of them, and I couldn't be happier because these are moments that really differentiate Final Fantasy VII from a lot of the other games in the series. It's a very serious story that doesn't always take itself seriously, and that's something I've always loved about it, so I'm really happy to see that it still lives on through the remake. I'm really excited to see all the other crazy shenanigans our party gets into, like having a dolphin jump 50 feet in the air with you on its back, or the June and March, or all the new stuff that they plan to add. I just cannot wait. But anyways guys, that's it for me. Be sure to let me know what you loved about the remake, and if you have any examples of what you thought it did better in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time.